The email arrived at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: role transition. My hands went cold before I even opened it. 3 paragraphs of corporate language that boiled down to this: my position was being eliminated, effective in 2 weeks. I stared at the screen, reading it twice, then 3 times, waiting for the part where it made sense. It never came. An hour later, the company-wide announcement went out. Mark Sullivan was being promoted to Senior Operations Manager with a salary increase of $75,000. The same Mark I'd spent the last 4 months training. The same Mark who still didn't know how half our systems worked without asking me first. I sat in my cubicle surrounded by the hum of keyboards and distant conversations, and I understood something I should have seen months ago. This wasn't about performance. It never had been. They'd already chosen him before I ever started teaching him my job. I learned how to be professional early in my career. It meant keeping my voice even during disagreements. It meant nodding when men interrupted me in meetings, then waiting for a pause to finish my point. It meant never showing frustration, even when I was the only one in the room who'd actually read the reports. My first manager at Caldwell Analytics, a woman named Diane Foster, pulled me aside after 6 months and told me I was doing great work, but I needed to smile more in client meetings. She said it gently, like she was doing me a favor. I was 24 then, and didn't understand what she really meant. Men got praised for being direct and confident. I got praised for being pleasant and easy to work with. By the time I turned 32, I'd perfected the art of being competent without being threatening. Calm without being cold. Efficient without making anyone feel inadequate. I thought that was the strategy. I was wrong. The problem with being extremely capable is that nobody notices when things run smoothly. My role as operations manager at Caldwell Analytics involved keeping 7 different departments coordinated, 3 major clients satisfied, and a dozen ongoing projects from falling apart. I didn't ask for help because I didn't need it. I didn't require constant check-ins because I already knew what needed to happen. I didn't send my boss, Victoria Lang, daily updates to reassure her I was working. I just worked. And everything functioned. But Victoria preferred employees who made her feel necessary, who asked her opinion on decisions they could make themselves, who validated her authority by seeking approval. I solved problems independently, which meant Victoria rarely heard about them. That should have been a good thing. Instead, it made me invisible. When budgets got tight and leadership started evaluating who added the most value, I had no advocate, because I'd never needed one before. There was an unspoken rule at Caldwell that I didn't fully understand until it was too late. Men were allowed to be assertive, even aggressive, in meetings. They could challenge ideas loudly, disagree with senior leadership, push back on timelines. It was called confidence, executive presence, leadership potential. Women were expected to be right and pleasant at the same time. We could have strong opinions as long as we delivered them softly. We could correct mistakes as long as we made the person who made them feel good about being corrected. I was very good at my job. I had data, documentation, and results to prove it. But I wasn't particularly warm about it. I didn't soften my emails with exclamation points or add smiley faces to my Slack messages. I stated facts clearly and expected people to act on them. That made me competent. It also made me easy to dislike. I didn't see Mark as a threat when he arrived. Why would I? I'd been with Caldwell Analytics for 6 years. I knew every process, every client relationship, every unwritten rule that kept operations running smoothly. I'd built half the systems we used from scratch. When Victoria told me we were hiring someone to help with the workload, I was relieved. I thought help meant assistance. Someone to handle the routine tasks while I focused on strategy. Instead, Mark was hired at the same level I'd worked years to reach. Same title, same base salary. From day one, people treated him differently than they'd treated me when I started. He made mistakes that would have gotten me reprimanded, but everyone laughed them off as part of his learning curve. He asked basic questions I would have been embarrassed to ask, and people called it intellectual curiosity. I didn't see it then, because I still believed performance mattered most. I thought if I just kept doing excellent work, everything would be fine. Mark Sullivan arrived in March, all easy confidence and firm handshakes. He was 40, recently relocated from the Chicago office, and comfortable taking up space in a way I'd never managed. In our first team meeting, he introduced himself by telling a story about a project he'd led that saved his previous company $2 million. People leaned in, nodding. I'd saved Caldwell $3 million the year before by renegotiating our vendor contracts, but I'd never mentioned it in a meeting. It felt like bragging. Mark made it sound like leadership. Within a week, people gravitated toward him naturally. He'd stop by desks just to chat, ask about weekends, remember names of people's kids. I'd always kept conversations professional, focused. I thought that was what work meant. But watching Mark operate, I started to understand something uncomfortable. People didn't just want competence. They wanted someone who made them feel good. And Mark was very, very good at that, even when he had no idea what he was talking about. The difference in how we were received became obvious during project meetings. When Mark pushed back on a timeline, saying it was unrealistic and we needed more resources, Victoria nodded thoughtfully. She called it strategic thinking. The previous month, I'd flagged the exact same timeline as problematic and provided data showing we were understaffed. Victoria told me I was being negative and needed to focus on solutions, not problems. When Mark disagreed with a client's request in a call, explaining why their approach wouldn't work, the client thanked him for his expertise. When I'd done the same thing 2 years earlier, the client complained to Victoria that I wasn't being collaborative enough. I started paying closer attention to the language people used. Mark was assertive. I was difficult. Mark had strong opinions. I was inflexible. Mark didn't accept poor work. I was hard to please. Same actions, different words, different consequences. Victoria asked me to mentor Mark in April. She framed it as an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate my leadership capabilities by developing talent. I should have recognized it for what it was: knowledge extraction. I spent hours explaining systems I'd built, walking Mark through client histories, teaching him the political landscape of who needed reassurance and who needed flattery. I showed him which executives valued data and which ones just wanted to feel heard. I translated 6 years of institutional knowledge into digestible lessons, answering every question with patience I didn't know I had. Mark absorbed everything quickly. He took notes, asked follow-up questions, sent thank you emails after each session. He was a good student. I was a thorough teacher. I gave him everything I'd learned through trial and error, all the context I'd never been given when I started. I handed him a roadmap to success that had taken me years to draw. And I never once considered that I was teaching him how to replace me. By June, I started noticing something strange in meetings. Mark would present ideas that sounded extremely familiar. He'd explain a process improvement using the exact framework I'd taught him the week before, but he delivered it with more confidence and fewer details. People nodded along enthusiastically. Then I realized he was repeating things I'd said in previous meetings, concepts I'd introduced months earlier that had landed with indifference. But when Mark said them, they sounded fresh, visionary. I sat there watching my own ideas get better reception because they came from him, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't that he was stealing credit deliberately. He probably didn't even realize he was doing it. He'd learned from me, absorbed the information, and now presented it as his own understanding. The problem was that people listened differently when he spoke. His voice carried weight mine never had, even when he was just echoing what I'd already said. I first noticed Victoria's relief in small ways. The way her shoulders relaxed when Mark asked her opinion on decisions. The way she smiled when he checked in with her about project directions I would have simply handled. Mark needed validation constantly, and Victoria loved giving it. He'd send her updates on tasks that didn't require updates. He'd ask for her input on choices he could have made independently. He'd compliment her leadership in team meetings, crediting her vision for project successes. I'd always believed good management meant solving problems independently, only escalating when absolutely necessary. I thought making my boss's job easier meant handling things myself. But Victoria didn't want things handled. She wanted to feel involved. Mark made her feel like a leader. I made her feel unnecessary. And in corporate environments, making your boss feel important matters more than making their job easier. That should have been my first real warning sign. It wasn't. I still thought performance would matter more than politics. The phrase appeared in my mid-year review, buried in the feedback section. While your technical skills are strong, we'd like to see more executive presence. I asked Victoria what that meant specifically. She paused, choosing her words carefully, then said Mark had a natural way of commanding a room that inspired confidence. I asked how I could develop that quality. She suggested I observe how Mark presented ideas, how he built consensus, how he made people feel included in decisions. I nodded and made notes, but something about the conversation felt wrong. Executive presence seemed to mean something different for everyone. For Mark, it meant speaking confidently even when he wasn't certain. For me, it would have meant being wrong with authority. I spent the next week watching Mark in action, trying to decode what made his presence executive, while mine was merely competent. The answer was uncomfortable. He made people feel smart. I made them feel measured. Leadership apparently preferred feeling smart. There was a simple equation I didn't understand until too late. Mark made leadership feel in control because he constantly sought their approval. When he succeeded, they felt they'd guided him. When he struggled, they felt needed. I made leadership feel exposed because I highlighted problems they hadn't noticed and fixed them before they could. My competence was a mirror that reflected their gaps. I once pointed out in a leadership meeting that we'd been underbilling a major client for 6 months due to a contract interpretation error. I'd already drafted the correction plan and had spoken with the client's team to smooth the transition. Victoria thanked me, but her jaw was tight. Later, the CFO, Paul Hendricks, asked her why she hadn't caught the issue sooner. She had no good answer. I'd solved the problem, but I'd also made her look negligent. Mark would have brought the problem to Victoria privately first, let her present the solution in the meeting, made her look decisive. I'd thought efficiency mattered. Actually, protecting egos mattered more. In August, Victoria started asking me to document everything. Every process, every client preference, every system workflow. She called it knowledge management, said we needed better institutional documentation, in case anyone was out sick or on vacation. I spent 3 weeks writing detailed guides on everything I did, creating step-by-step instructions that someone with no background could follow. I made training videos. I built decision trees. I organized 6 years of tribal knowledge into a clean, searchable database. I thought I was being helpful. Actually, I was making myself replaceable. The documentation meant anyone could do my job now, at least on paper. They didn't need my instincts or experience, they just needed the manual I'd written. Looking back, I can see it clearly, but at the time, I just followed instructions. I was good at that. Too good. When I asked Victoria about advancement opportunities in September, she smiled in that careful way managers do when they're about to say no without saying it. I think you're overthinking this, she said gently. You're doing great work. Just keep focusing on what you do well. I mentioned I'd been at the same level for 4 years. She said some people were naturally suited for execution rather than strategy. I asked what I could do to demonstrate strategic thinking. She said I should stop worrying about titles and focus on impact. The conversation felt like running into a wall that wasn't visible until you hit it. Every question I asked got deflected with vague reassurance. I left her office feeling like I'd done something wrong by asking. A week later, I stopped asking. Not because I didn't want growth, because I'd learned the real message. My ambition made people uncomfortable. Women who pushed too hard were difficult. So I went back to being pleasant and competent. And I watched my career plateau while I smiled about it. The announcement came in October. Due to budget constraints, there would be no raises this year, except in cases of significant role expansion. I'd heard this before and accepted it. Corporate budgets were tight. I understood. Then Mark's promotion was announced 3 weeks later. Senior Operations Manager. $75,000 salary increase, expanded responsibilities overseeing the teams I currently managed. When I saw the email, I read it 4 times to make sure I understood correctly. They'd said there was no budget for raises, but apparently, there was budget for this. I walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and focused on breathing evenly. The rage that burned through me wasn't about Mark. It was about being lied to. If they'd said they were investing in different leadership, I could have accepted it. But they told me there was no money, then found money for someone else. That wasn't budget constraints. That was priority. The firing came 2 weeks after Mark's promotion. No warning. No performance improvement plan. No feedback suggesting I was in danger. Just a meeting with Victoria and someone from HR I'd never met before. A man named Wesley Chen, who read from a script about role elimination and organizational restructuring. My position was being dissolved. My responsibilities would be distributed across other team members, primarily Mark. They were offering me 2 months of severance and would extend my health insurance through the end of the year. Victoria barely made eye contact. She said something about this being a difficult business decision. Nothing personal. I asked what I could have done differently. Wesley said this wasn't about performance, it was about strategic alignment and future organizational needs. Translation: you don't fit the image we want. I cleaned out my desk while everyone pretended not to watch. 6 years of work fit into 2 cardboard boxes. I carried them to my car in the rain, and I didn't cry. Not yet. A week after I was let go, my former coworker Amanda Reeves met me for coffee. She'd been my closest work friend, someone who actually noticed when things shifted. We sat in a corner booth and she looked uncomfortable before she finally said it. They liked Mark better because he fit the image they wanted for leadership. I asked what image. She stirred her coffee slowly. You know, the right look, the right energy, the way he talks in meetings, the confidence. Victoria felt more comfortable with him. I pressed her. Was it because he was a man? Amanda hesitated, then nodded. Not just that, but yeah, you made people work harder to keep up. He made people feel good about where they were, and when budgets got tight, they kept the person who made them comfortable. I sat there holding my cup, watching steam rise. I hadn't been fired for incompetence. I'd been fired for not fitting the story they wanted to tell about their leadership team. Competence could be replaced. Comfort couldn't. The realization settled into my bones slowly over the next few weeks. I hadn't been fired for failing, I'd been fired for succeeding in the wrong way. I'd solved problems too independently. I'd made leadership feel unnecessary instead of important. I'd been correct instead of collaborative. I'd prioritized results over relationships. Every single thing I thought made me valuable had actually made me expendable. Because in corporate environments, being irreplaceable doesn't protect you. It threatens people. I'd built systems so efficient they didn't need me anymore. I'd documented everything so thoroughly anyone could do my job. I'd trained my replacement so well he could step in seamlessly. I'd done exactly what good employees are supposed to do, and it had cost me everything. The unfairness of it made me furious, but the clarity was almost freeing. I finally understood the game. I just wished I'd learned the rules before I'd already lost. Mark lasted 7 months in my old role before the cracks started showing. I heard about it through Amanda, who still texted me updates. He'd learned confidence from watching leadership, but he'd never learned the consequences of decisions. He knew how to present ideas, but not how to execute them. He understood the what of our operations, but not the why. When things ran smoothly, he looked great. But the moment something broke, he had no idea how to fix it. He'd learned my processes from documentation, but documentation can't teach instinct. It can't explain the 100 small judgment calls I made every day based on years of experience. He started making mistakes, small ones at first, missed deadlines, miscommunicated priorities, client complaints about delayed responses, then bigger ones. A major project went over budget because he didn't understand the vendor relationships I'd spent years building. He approved a contract change that cost the company $50,000 because he didn't know the client's history. Leadership started asking questions. Where was the efficiency? Where were the results? In March, a year after Mark first arrived, I got a LinkedIn message from a competitor called Brightwell Solutions. They'd heard about my work at Caldwell through industry contacts. Would I be interested in discussing a senior director role focused on operational strategy? I took the call. The hiring manager, a woman named Patricia Cole, asked detailed questions about my approach to systems design, crisis management, client relationships. She didn't ask me to smile more. She didn't comment on my tone. She asked about results, and I gave her numbers. 3 days later, they made an offer. Senior Director of Operations. 30% higher salary than I'd made at Caldwell. Leadership role, with direct reports. Autonomy to build systems my way. But what sold me wasn't the money or title. It was Patricia's final comment in our conversation. We value people who solve problems independently here. We don't need hand-holding. We need people who see what needs to happen and make it happen. That's you. I accepted before the day ended. I'd been at Brightwell for 4 months when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't saved. I answered, and Victoria Lang's voice came through, careful and measured. "Hi, Claire. I hope you're doing well. I heard you landed at Brightwell. Congratulations." I thanked her and waited. There was a pause. "I'm reaching out because we're having some challenges with operations integration. Some of the systems you built are having issues, and we're trying to troubleshoot. I was wondering if you might be available for some consulting work. We'd pay your hourly rate, of course." Her tone was different now. Not dismissive. Not casual. Respectful. Almost careful. Like she was talking to someone whose expertise she actually valued. It was the voice she'd used with executives. Never with me. Not until now. I let the silence hang for a moment before I responded. And I realized something. The power had shifted completely. I didn't say yes immediately. I told Victoria I'd need to think about it and get back to her. When I called her back 2 days later, I had terms. $500 per hour. Minimum 6-month contract. Payment up front for the first month. Non-negotiable scope limitations. I wouldn't train anyone. I wouldn't create documentation. I would fix the specific problems they identified. Nothing more. And I would work remotely on my schedule, not theirs. Victoria hesitated, then asked if there was flexibility on the rate. I said no. She said she'd need to get approval and would call me back. 3 days later, she called and accepted every term. They were desperate. The operations I'd built were falling apart without someone who understood how all the pieces connected. Mark had the confidence but not the capability, and now they needed me back. But this time, I wasn't their employee. I was their most expensive mistake. I worked with Caldwell for exactly 6 months as a contractor. I fixed the systems that had broken. I stabilized the client relationships Mark had damaged. I rebuilt the vendor connections he'd burned through inexperience. And I did it all remotely, on my terms, for more money in half a year than I'd made in my last 2 years as their employee. I was polite, professional. I delivered exactly what they paid for and nothing extra. No mentoring, no knowledge transfer, no going above and beyond. When the contract ended, Victoria asked if I'd consider coming back full-time. They could restructure the role, she said. Make it work. I thanked her and declined. During my exit meeting, she asked what they could have done differently. I looked at her across the video call and said simply, "You could have valued competence as much as comfort." She didn't have a response to that. Mark was let go during Caldwell's restructuring in September, about 18 months after he'd been hired. I heard through Amanda that leadership had finally acknowledged what I'd known from the beginning. He had executive presence, but he didn't have execution capability. Confidence doesn't fix broken systems. Charisma doesn't build sustainable operations. He'd been very good at looking like a leader. He just couldn't actually lead. I didn't take pleasure in his failure. He wasn't a villain. He was just someone who'd been handed opportunities I'd had to fight for, and he hadn't been equipped to handle them. The real failure was Caldwell's leadership, choosing the comfortable option over the competent one. They'd picked someone who made them feel good instead of someone who made them successful. And they'd paid for that choice in ways that went far beyond my consulting fees. Looking back now, I understand what happened at Caldwell wasn't personal. It was structural. Favoritism isn't usually about one person hating another. It's about systems that reward certain types of people while penalizing others for the same behaviors. I trained my replacement because I thought being helpful mattered. He got a $75,000 raise because he fit an image I never could. And choosing comfort over competence cost them everything. But it taught me something crucial. The game isn't fair, and pretending it is only hurts you. Now I work somewhere that values what I actually bring instead of who I make them feel like. I don't smile more in meetings. I don't soften my emails. I solve problems, deliver results, and get paid what I'm worth. And when companies call asking for help fixing what they broke, I charge them exactly what my expertise costs. Because I finally learned the most important lesson. Your value isn't determined by how comfortable you make people. It's determined by what happens when you're gone.